So, looking at this title, and obviously listening to Mel reading the title, they've got a bit of a warning that goes with this, and I think it is, if you're ever in a position sometime in the middle of January, I think at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and your boss says, have you got any titles for the conference that's coming up in June? And you kind of go, oh yeah, well, we could do this or this or this. And then 2 or 3 weeks later, or maybe 3 or 4 months later, whatever you've said on that day has appeared on a program. So, yeah, probably sorry for too many words, actually, because I think that's actually what happened on that Monday afternoon. Can you put that in writing? Yeah, I'll put it in writing. Send it off. Off it went. And then it's on the program. So there is a bit of background to this, because what I've started off with a warning. And there is a conversation that seems to go on quite a lot between ourselves within NATA education and also with people who are on the courses. And that seems to revolve around, with us, we tend to say, oh, well, that's because all the people on our courses are introverts. And very often, when I'm running courses, and we talk about this within the training team, we say, oh, is that because everyone who comes on our courses are introverts? So I'm going to ask some questions around that, and maybe start to ask some questions, and maybe I'm going to share some, oops, better not touch the mic, sorry. Share some revelations that I've discovered, I've experienced over the last, I suppose, 15 or 20 years in this subject, because it's something which is very close to my heart, and I'll try not to touch my heart as I say that. And I think that there are a lot of assumptions that are made, and there are a lot of generalizations, and there are a lot of misconceptions or even myths that surround this subject. So I'll get back to that question, those 2 questions that we raised later on. So the first question I'm going to raise is, what is an introvert? How many introverts do you think we have in the room? Well, judging by the response, possibly more than half. Okay, so I'm going to challenge this subject and this label, which I think sometimes we give ourselves, or very often we give other people. And it goes back to Carl Jung, who, as you may know, was a student and a contemporary of Sigmund Freud and kind of the birth of human psychology and psychoanalysis. And he was Swiss, and his original work, Psychological Types, or Type Theory, was translated into English in the 1920s. And he was the first person to actually, and it does translate from the Swiss German, to use these terms, introversion and extraversion. And some of you might also know that work was picked up on by a mother and daughter team, Catherine Briggs and Isabel Myers. And if you don't know their names, you probably know the assessment type, and it's the type indicator self-assessment, which is the Myers-Briggs, or the MBTI. And they picked up on 4 of the characteristics that Carl Jung had identified, and they added another one on their own, and they developed a self-assessment tool, which is the Myers-Briggs type indicator. And that's probably how it's become into our parlance and a lot of our acceptance. So, as you may know, and if you haven't, and this is not going to be a Myers-Briggs session, the Myers-Briggs type indicator asks you to assess yourself openly. It's not a psychometric or a psychoanalysis, it's a self-assessment on how you have preferences according to these 4 choices. So where do you get your energy from? How do you like to receive and process information? How do you make decisions? And then your general approach to life and work and projects. So I'm only going to look at, actually I'm just going to run through to give you the complete picture. The words are originally translated from the German, and they don't translate brilliantly into English, so that's why we tend to use the letters, and you end up with a choice of E or I, S or N, T or F, J or P on the questionnaire. And then, so those are the German words, and then the combinations or the permutations that you have of those 4 choices, and those 8 letters give you all of these different choices. And this is where I have a little voice in my head, because I was very lucky I'd used the Myers-Briggs type indicator for a number of years in my professional work. And then I qualified in the subject. And I was very lucky to learn from this lady, which I think is coming up next. Oh yeah, so introversion and extraversion is what I'd like to focus on. Anna Sullivan learned her theory, type theory, from Kathy Myers, who was Isabel Myers' daughter-in-law, and was also involved in setting up the Myers-Briggs Foundation. In fact, she was the first person to take the Myers-Briggs type indicator out of the US and took it the rest of the world, to Australia, to Europe. And I did some training with Anne, and she became a mentor of mine. Sister Anne, she's actually a nun. She feels that this would be a useful concept for the world to be a better place, and people would get on better with each other if they understood more about each other's differences. So one of the things that Anne, lots of things I learned from Sister Anne, was, first of all, this was her thing. And she would talk a lot about type theory. And whenever she said type theory, she said, and it is just a theory, or it's only a theory. And she said, and that's the great thing about a theory, or it's a model, because if you don't like it, you can ignore it, or you can change the model. So it's not something that's set in stone, it's a theory. And then the other thing she used to say a lot is, whenever someone said, oh, is that because I'm an E? Or is that because he's an I? Or is that because I'm an introvert? She would say, you mean you have a preference for introversion? And that's according to type theory, not a label or a noun. So throughout the rest of this presentation, I probably will say introvert, but in my head, I've got Sister Anne saying you shouldn't say that. It's a preference for introversion. So if I look at those two preferences, in certain situations with certain people of a certain type or a certain preference, they tend to live more in the external world, and they draw their energy from the external world. And the analogy that's often cited is it's like a solar panel. As long as there is an external source of energy, then those people will keep going. And that is extraversion, or preference for extraversion in its boldest sense. And then in other situations, and for certain other people, they tend to live more in the inner world. And that's how Carl Jung defined it originally. And the Myers-Briggs preference for introversion is that those people draw their energy from an inner source. And the fact is that when that inner source runs out, then they run down. And they need to go and recharge. I mean, so you can make the comparison from a solar cell to a rechargeable battery. And some people who have a preference for introversion can be very extroverted in their behavior, but it will run out, and then they need to go and recharge. So people with a preference for extraversion tend to, this is according to Myers-Briggs, is it going to work? Oh yeah. They tend to be energized by being with other people. They will talk through things quite often before thinking. They tend to be spontaneous. They like to know a lot of people, and they like working in teams and groups. They have lots of breadth of discussions and interests and things like that. Now this is kind of veering towards the extreme or the exaggerated version, but these tend to be the traits. And the interesting thing is about Myers-Briggs, according to Myers-Briggs data, this is about 52% of the population. It's American data, and they extrapolate worldwide. Whereas if we look at people who have a preference for introversion, they tend to be energized by their inner world. They reflect quite often before speaking. They prefer often to work independently, quiet, often will prefer to send an email rather than make a phone call. And they like depth and maybe have a few depth interests or sometimes obsessions. And again, according to Myers-Briggs, and this is, again, global data now, over several decades, that's nearly half of the population. So I asked this question earlier on, and I'm just going to draw your attention. You can maybe look at this if you want to. This is very recent. I picked up this article between January and this month. It's by Jen Graneman. She wrote a great book called The Secret Life of Introverts. And she actually put together a list, and there's a more in-depth discussion on this article. The article is called Introvert Dear. It's part of a publication. And I'm just not going to read those through, but you might want to just have a quick look and think about, is this more me or is this less me? It's not quantified, it's not statistical, it's just more about, are you that sort of person? And if there's anything that you probably don't understand in those statements, then that's probably not you. And there's probably some that you go, oh yeah, okay, I know exactly what that means. So, it's very recent. I'm going to take you back to a bit of a personal journey for me and a couple of revelations. The first revelation for me was way back in, I'm pressing the laser, aren't I? Happened to me in 1998, and was the first time I actually went through the Myers-Briggs type indicator in depth. I'd known about it, and I'd used it on courses, probably misused it on courses, giving it out and saying, oh yeah, you're an E, you're an I, you're an S, whatever. And I actually went through the process with a consultant who gave me the self-assessment, and we talked through the results. And I realized that actually it was okay to have this preference. And if I go back in history, a little bit of self-disclosure here. I grew up in the south of England in a Scottish family. And well, my parents were fairly passionate expat Scots people. It tends to happen quite a lot. Years later, I was actually doing a radio interview with Colin Hay. Do you know Colin Hay, singer in Men at Work? And it turned out he had exactly the same stories as I did, growing up with a Scottish parents outside Scotland. And we had this kind of huge exchange before the interview went live. And thankfully, kind of made a bit of a connection through, like, oh my God, we both went through the same thing. So, grew up with a Scottish family in the south of England, yeah, and it kind of entailed everything you'd expect, that we were constantly, being, well, twice a year mainly, Hogmanay and Burns Night, that the tartan would come out and the kilts would come out, and all of those things would happen, and the house would get filled with people. And then, if anyone knows, or anyone's got any Scottish heritage, there's this thing about doing your turn. And then you're sort of pushed in front of everyone who would like to sing your song or say your poem. My sister, she would do about 6. And she went on to be a professional actor and a singer, and has made a career out of that. But my parents were also performers. They both sang as a folk duo. And I was like, do I have to do this? I don't want to do this. And I was told, don't be so stupid. Because it was wrong to be like that. So I kind of took that with me for a while, and when I went to university, in my final year, I chose all subjects which did not involve making a public presentation. Yeah, in a career for 30 years, which has been involved making public presentations. Absolutely. And then I went into, I don't know what was going through my head, really. I went into a career which involved being out there. I was a sales rep for 10 or 11 years for 3 different, in drug companies. And my bosses were always on my case. You need to be more out there. You need to speak more loudly. They wanted me to conform to that brash stereotype of the salesperson. And the thing was, I was actually quite successful at being a sales rep, by being a kind of an anti-rep. Someone told me, you're like an anti-rep. So we always like to see you because you're not pushy, you're not brash, you're not loud, and you don't push us, and you're not in our faces. But I kind of lived with that for a while. And then I was poached twice. ICI before it became AstraZeneca, and then for Bayer. And when I worked for Bayer, that was when I first went into training, and that is 30 years ago. And my boss in training was quite famous. his name was Neil. But even his wife called him Ned. And there were people across the industry and across the company that didn't know that his name was not Ned Kelly. In fact, we once went to a conference and Kylie Minogue was in the same hotel in central London. And he was beyond gregarious. And he was, I'm going to get your interview. And I was like, yeah, okay, fine. And of course he queued up. And he said it was for his kids, but really he was going to get Kylie's interview. And of course she looked at his name badge and went, kind of famous where I come from, mate. Kind of famous yourself. So he was larger than life. He was way over 6 foot. And he was loud and brash. And he did amateur dramatics. And he just loved being the center of attention. And that's what I used to think. But then I started to realize that he just was this person who totally was energized by external sources and external stimuli. And as long as there was an interaction, then he would just keep going. And then every year comes up my performance review. And he'd say, now then, Mr. Stark, I don't want you sitting at the back of the room before the courses start. I don't want you disappearing off around the back of the building to have a quick cigarette in the morning tea breaks. I want you to have lunch with the course delegates. I want you to socialize with them and meet and greet them. And I didn't really know at the time that he was depriving me of my own recharge time. He wanted me to be like him. And this was, as part of a performance review, was seen as a fault and something which I needed to fix. And the thing was that I was off at the back of the room or the back of the building having a quick cigarette, and then promoting cardiovascular drugs and respiratory drugs and anti-cancer drugs. And I was actually focusing my energy. And then it was sometimes 5 days a week for 7 or 8 hours a day, being really out there and being extraverted in my behavior. But I didn't know this at the time, but I needed that me time, that focus time, that charge time. And at the end of the day, it goes, Stark, get your credit card behind the bar, we're going across the road, we're all going to the pub. And it's like, oh my God, really? I'm drained. Can I not just have 10 minutes? No, come on. You need to put your credit card behind the bar. We're going to go have a drink. And that was very accepted, normal, expected behavior in the 90s. The fact that we went to the pub at lunchtime and had 2 or 3 pints and then came back in the afternoon and ran a training session was, also part of the behavior in the 90s. The key was putting a guest speaker on. You could get back to the office, introduce the guest speaker, get back to the pub, have maybe the 3rd pint, which was lined up for you. Thanks very much, guest speaker. And then train for the rest of the afternoon. It's a bit of a bizarre concept these days. So learning about the Myers-Briggs type indicator, which was about 4 or 5 years later, was a big revelation for me. That there wasn't something wrong. What my parents had told me led me to believe. And there wasn't something wrong when I went to sales conferences and couldn't make small talk. I used to dread the coffee breaks. Because 250 people would come out, and it was all rah-rah and pyrotechnics, and it was always with the same songs. It was Simply the Best, or We've Got the Power, and then people would be talking, and I'd stand there with my coffee cup, thinking, oh my God, I'm standing out. Oh my God, I'm not mixing. What are these people talking about? I'll try and join in a conversation. They're just talking rubbish. How can you just be standing there talking this banal nonsense? There's something wrong with me. I'm standing out as being not fitting in. And that's really where the misconceptions come from. And that's the first misconception I'd like to draw your attention to. So when we say introvert, or I'm going to use my definition, some with a preference for introversion, this is not true. Introverts do need to turn off and recharge, and then be extroverted in their behavior. It's not antisocial. It's not because there's something wrong with us. We don't need medication. And I love this. I'll talk about Jonathan Rauch in a minute, but as restorative as sleeping and as nourishing as eating, to have that downtime, that me time. So I'll go back to Jen Graneman, because she quotes Jean-Paul Sartre. Hell isn't quite other people, but she says, hell is other people at breakfast. And if anyone who knows me sees me in a hotel and wants to talk to me at breakfast, it's like, just go away. I'm having this me time today, especially if I'm going to be training in front of people for the rest of the... So yeah, hell is not other people. Hell might be other people at breakfast. But actually, for a lot of people, we put them through hell. And I can see Alexander at the back. Everyone else in the room is a trainer. This is hell for a lot of people. And I'll put my hand up for, I know that we make people do this. So if I come fast forward to Revelation number 2, which was about 12, 13 years ago. So I was living in Sydney. I was working for the Australian Institute of Management. I'm doing a lot of leadership training. First time supervisor, advanced diploma of leadership and management. A lot of the courses, the more advanced courses, included managing performance or leading according to different types. And at the time, the big one was Gen Y, or the difference between managing different people from Gen Y, Gen X, baby boomers, whatever. But I read an article, and in preparation for this presentation, I couldn't find it, which I did read in 2011, but this was it revamped in 2017. And this was the exact headline at the time, which is about introverts, the workplace, and are you overlooking the untapped potential of half of your people? And for me, this was a revelation, and the article was all about the fact that we tend to collude, or a lot of managers are selected because of their outgoing sort of personalities, and those people collude with people like themselves. It's a natural human trait. And in the article, it says half, and I've done some research, and I was also reading some stuff by Jen Graneman. She said it can go from anything to 25% to about half, or just under half, or I prefer this one, a minority in the regular population, but a majority in the gifted population. So at that time, about 2011, I thought this was a revelation, but it wasn't new. And it goes back to Jonathan Rauch, and he's an amazing writer. He has been championing this case since 2003. And he talks about roughly one half. And I love this, yet their contributions are often stunted and unnoticed in favor of easygoing extroverts. But the experts say, and this was, human resource management and succession planning, that's not good business if you're not tapping into half of your workforce, the thoughts or the ideas, or the potential of half of your workforce, simply because they're not speaking up, or you're not allowing them the chance to speak up. So the other thing that was happening around that time, and some of you might know this name, Susan Cain. She wrote this book called Quiet. It's what is it? How to Think in a World That Can't Stop Talking is one of her subtitles. And then she did a TED Talk. And is very famous for doing a TED Talk, which was so outside her comfort zone that people just empathized with her and felt for her. And she has been championing the case exactly the same as Jonathan Rauch for the last 12 years or so. 12, 13 years. And I do follow her. I follow her on LinkedIn, and I'm on her subscription for her email group. If you can't see it there, it says, this is a very recent photograph. It said, this is me at a book signing in Perth, Australia. I sincerely enjoyed it. And then I ran off to my hotel room and ordered room service. And I love the fact this is part of what I started incorporating in my work. In the TED Talk, there's lots of really brilliant sound bites, but this is my favorite. And she challenges managers, often managers who are selected on their outgoing extroverted personalities for colluding with people who are like them and overlooking what might be the best ideas and the best suggestions in the room because they're being talked over, or they might not be given time to think. So going back to Jonathan Rauch, he has this cultural factor that Western cultures tend, and I would blame the Americans basically, we tend to favor loud, outgoing people. So I started using this in my work, working for various RTOs and also as my own consultant, through a consultancy. My own work started at the Australian Institute of Management and then kind of worked on from there. I started to see it a lot. And I did a lot of teamwork exercises where the team leader would be chosen or would be self-selected for being the kind of maybe more outgoing person and would collude and favor the people that were like them. So, I mean, I'm not going to labor the point. So, go past this one. Even when I've worked with people, I've done an MBTI presentation quite often with someone who's the opposite preference type to me, and they'll talk about all of this stuff, and they go, and now Alasdair's going to tell you all about how to be boring and quiet. And there's always this, there's this down on. And I'm also looking at this other person, and I'm thinking about individuals, and they're saying, you know about this, but you're still labeling me with this judgment. So, I mean, we all know Rowan Atkinson for all sorts of reasons, but why are you so quiet? There's nothing wrong with being quiet. And that goes back to me being a child. Like, don't be so stupid. It's like, I don't want to stand up in front of people. And there may be, like I said, I'm not just blaming Americans, but Western culture that tends to applaud and encourage the more outgoing. And then there's a lot in the Eastern culture. And you can probably go from that dividing line of the historically people that did fermenting and then people who did brewing or boiling for their recreational drinks. And there's a dividing line that probably goes with the cultures that revere and idealize people that are more reserved and more quieter. So, I like the quotation from Rowan Atkinson, but the thing is that this is where I want to go with this. It's not just the extroverts or the introverts who could be labeled as being the abnormal one. I mean, sometimes you can have an extrovert in introverted culture. So this is my question. This is the question I was supposed to be answering for the presentation. And this is where we started. I said, look, very often on the course, we talk about people who come on our courses as being introverts. And people on our courses very often say, is that because we're all introverts? Well, on a non-statistical survey, some people might know about the DISC. It's another personality profiling. I don't want to get the two muddled up, but basically, this is taken from our Leading in Laboratory course for new supervisors. And we use the DISC as a profile, as a self-assessment tool. And within the DISC profile, there are basically these two axes that are you more active or less active and more passive? Are you more task-focused or are you more people-focused? And basically, the stuff below the line, I would say, is more associated with introversion, and the stuff above the line, which is actually about being out there and getting things done, or being that sort of affiliation, people profile, that's more of the extraversion types. Now, last time I ran the course, this is the scatter I got. And that's very, very, so people did their self-assessment, and we said, okay, what have we got in the room? And that's what it looked like. And it's very, very frequent. That very often this happens, that we get a lot of people up in the sort of a high affiliation profile, the people, and a lot of people who are out there and more dominant. And a lot fewer people, fewer than a lot of people would expect, in the sort of compliance and steadiness, which is sort of the introversion types. So that tends to happen a lot, even though we make these generalizations about people that come on our courses being introverted types. When they self-assess, it turns out that very often they're not. And it's happened to me before. I used to work a lot when I worked for myself with academics. I worked for about 5 years with Southern Cross University, all new managers, all the staff training. I was once running a session on introversion, on extraversion, introversion. And this guy just went, well, that's not right. I was talking about the characteristics of introversion. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, that's just not true. I thought, I think I know what's going on here. He said, that's not true of introversions. Introverts are not like that at all. This was the most non-introverted type of person that I've ever. He'd been on several workshops with me. And I went, are you sure about that? I was like, and I left it hanging because I didn't want to say, you're not an introvert, don't be stupid, you wouldn't know. You know, he was actually, you know, he was the first person to speak in the room always. But he was assuming this, because and this was a tech team within a university. He said, we're all introverts. And that's what he was saying. I was like, you're so not. So that's my warnings, really. Don't make assumptions and don't impose those labels on people just because of what you might think or the role that they carry out. How are we doing for time, Mel?
Yes, we're okay. A couple more minutes.
Oh. Yep. And the other thing is, from that last experience, is not to adopt the label for yourself, but to think about what I said earlier on about, is that really being you? Or is it just a label which is convenient for what you do more than who you are? So I'm going to go past these couple of slides. It's a bit like that kind of, you know, is it just all bookish people wear glasses? So the thing is that, you know, if you're an introvert, are you a geek? Probably not. No one really knows. You know, with the tech population that happened, particularly the .com population at the end of the 90s, you know, we started to, you know, encourage and champion the case of the geek. But that is not necessarily just because people wear glasses and they're introverts. You know, this is another stereotypical label. Do you want me to wind up on this? Okay. Because extroverts can be geeks, and introverts can be, you know, introverts can be non-geeks. It's just another stereotype of a label. And, you know, there's sometimes the two things are collapsed. And this is, again, taken from another article. You know, to someone who is immersed in their study or immersed in their particular interest. And it's often portrayed on television. It's like, oh, this is an introverted type. They're geeky, they're techie. I think it's just a stereotype. Now, there's one thing which might be biasing this, and I believe very strongly it could be biasing it, is that people who have a preference for introversion, and this is being understood a lot more recently, is our brains work differently. I mean, really work differently. The blood flow works in a different way between people who have an extroverted preference and people with an introverted preference. So there's the way that the blood flows, as well as the sensitivity to either dopamine or the other types. What are they called? Catecholamines. So receptors in the brain. So people who are extroverted actually need more dopamine to be more stimulated. And that's why they do thrive on lots of external stimulation. Whereas people who have a preference for introversion are more sensitive to dopamine and will shut down if there's too much external stimulation. Now, the last point that sort of happened, it seems to be happening, is what happened during COVID, is that everyone was forced into an introverted working scenario. And some people really did, and it was the introvert's moment to shine. So what started to happen was after the during that time, a lot of the traits that we associate with introversion were seen as real qualities that were desired. And what's happened since then, and I think this kind of follows on with managing diversity and neurodiversity and a lot of other things that are happening across a more diverse acceptance of a more diverse population, is that people with introverted tendencies are being sought after. And again, I'll go back to Sister Anne, and this is recently from the website where she works. So my time with Kathy Myers allowed me to see how the needs of the times, and this is what she was talking about during COVID, had actually expanded our appreciation for differences. So, one more question. Do you think an introvert can be a good leader? Well, actually, as I was writing this presentation, I got an email from Susan Keynes, her email subscribing, and she's actually, this was the question that came up in my inbox. This was last Thursday. And I haven't actually haven't watched the webinar yet, but this is basically what she's talking about. She's talking about how people who don't necessarily see themselves as good leaders, because they see themselves as introverts, could actually be really good leaders. So this is the session she was running, and I'm going to watch the recording when I get home on Friday. And this is a very much of a current subject. Do you think an introvert would be a good librarian? Very, very famous and very often cited MBTI data. They looked at a population of librarians, and they found a more or less an even split between extroverts and introverts. The introverts like the solitude and the independence and the quiet, and the extroverts saw it as a great place to meet different people every day and interact with people and help them. And that's very famous MBTI data. So the last thing, which I was going to talk about, is in our leadership courses, we talk about either being more or less participative, more or less direct in our behavior. And the thing is that you need to be all types, and that's really recognizing behavior as opposed to the type preference. We talk about a more reticent person would say, can you possibly do this? Whereas a more outward-going type of person would say, I want this to happen. And we encourage people to move through. So, I'll just follow to there. So that's what I've done. I've asked some questions. I've challenged some misconceptions. I have some questions now, I believe, that people would like me to try and answer.
You do indeed.
I'd be very happy to do that.
And I've broken protocol and gone handheld so I can join you on the floor down here. Thought that was a good idea.
Okay.
What do you think of an ambivert?
I'm
glad you know what that is.
Quick answer.
Yes, please.
Okay, I'll go back to Sister Anne. She says it is a preference. And she talks about the 16 types. She said, it's a house of 16 rooms. We can go into any one at any time that we like, but we have favorites, where we feel more comfortable. And to think about the analogy with ambiverts, as in Carl Jung originally said that type preference, being an introvert or an extrovert, is like being left or right-handed. And there's some people are both. It's that simple. And the fact is, and that's why I talk about the difference in Western and Eastern cultures, we can't just be our own type. We have to move to that middle, and we have to flex to be one or the other. It doesn't really work to go and be a hermit or a monk and live in total seclusion. We have to be both. And that is also what Carl Jung cited, and was what Sister Anne was very, very adamant about. Being both and being able to flex between the two in our behavior, even if we have a type which is not the ambivert, which is just type preference. Okay?
Adapt to the situation.
Most definitely.
Mm-hmm. So we've got an interesting question here around strategies of drawing out ideas from introverts, which is probably quite a long question too.
It is.
Yes, but maybe a rapid fire.
In what situation? Do we know who the questioner was?
Daniel.
Daniel?
Horn?
What's the situation?
Not a particular situation, but let's say a laboratory environment,
Mm-hmm.
and we've got people with great ideas they don't like to say them in meetings.
Mm-hmm.
What are some good strategies or environments where we can encourage our introverts
Okay.
to give our...
All right, so what are good strategies for in a laboratory situation? Give them time to think. I'll just say that straightforward to everyone. I used to, I'm sure you've all seen it. I've worked in scenarios where the manager is holding a team meeting and we'll say, okay, so let's have any discussions. And we'll choose the most reticent person in the room and say, what do you think? And this person's like, I can't even think because I forgot what my name is. And it's, so involving those people in ways which are as far away from that as you can imagine. Time to think, time to process. And the other, it's like a trainer's trick, is if you want to involve someone, ask people questions which you know they know the answers to. Like I bet this happens a lot in your area, doesn't it, Paul? So you pick on someone and you say, and they go, oh yeah, this happens all the time. And then they go, oh my God, I just spoke. I didn't realize I was going to speak. Or, you know, where is it you work again, Simon? And that person goes, I work, and you go, and so yes, they speak without knowing, asking questions that you know, they know the answer to. So thinking about picking up, you know, Simon or Paul or Julie or whatever it is, and using their name and introducing them with something which is totally non-threatening. Could just be a yes, no. How long did it take to get here this morning? Type of question. Non-threatening.
Non-threatening, thank you. I have a question around the DISC assessment.
Yes.
And do you think there's some bias in the answering of questions because of the negative connotations around the term passive? So do you think people are selecting based on wanting to get certain results, maybe?
Oh, absolutely. All of these are self-assessments, and I work with several, and I'm qualified in several, including DISC and MBTI. They're not psychometrics, there's no tricks. You can decide to be who you want to be. And you can go, oh, I'll answer that question. I once went for a sales job, and they said, oh, we're going to do this questionnaire. I thought, oh, here we go. And it was DISC going, all right, okay, tick, 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 tick. I'll be direct, and it's like, great, brilliant profile. It's totally transparent. You can lie about yourself. When we do the MBTI assessment, we tend to say, do it on a Sunday afternoon in shoes off mode. That's what Anne used to say. Try and be as true to yourself as you can without going, oh, I wonder what this question's asking me. I think I'll be this one. So yes, it's about transparency, and it's not a trick, it's a self-assessment. So the bias, you can give yourself, to go back to the question, you can give yourself any bias you like. Yes?
Yes.
Is that it?
Yes, that's it.
Any others?
Yes. Oh, no, I have another question for you, which is around why you choose to stand up here and teach, and when your preference is for introversion. You're very good at it, which is nice to hear, given he's one of our trainers. Does it give you anxiety, and how do you cope with it?
Well, yes, it does, is the easy answer. When I was working with RTOs in Sydney, I used to do the Cert 4 trainer certificate, and that was like my bread and butter. I did it for about 5 years. And in that qualification, people have to give a 20-minute training talk. And some of them would be like, oh my God, I've been told I have to give this talk at the end. And I actually was accused once of, well, I did hypnotize someone to get rid of anxiety, or just talk them through. And people say, well, it's easy for you because you're a trainer. I was like, well, what's that got to do with the price of fish, really? Because, you know, I still get anxiety and I still feel those nerves. And it's not, I've done quite a lot on the psychology of presenting. It is a threatening situation. Everyone's eyes are looking at you. It's got foveal vision. You know, it's a predator thing. We feel that everyone is. You know, we feel threatened by it. Why am I doing it? I think I went into sales as a challenge for myself. I need to get out of this. I went into training because it was a good career move, and I found that I really enjoyed it. And I was 29 at the time, and I've been doing it ever since. I get a buzz out of it. Part of that might be an adrenaline rush, and just sort of the, what do you call them? The mind's gone blank. Someone can tell me. Yes, the endorphin rush. I really enjoy working with groups of people, and that's kind of my chosen vocation, to help people realize their potential. So that's why I do it, because I enjoy it.
And I think we enjoyed it too. Does anyone have any questions on the floor before we close? We probably have time for one more question. Introverts?
Absolutely. I was going to finish with Carly. Everything that irritates about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves. And there is one takeaway from this. It's about the flexibility with yourself, as well as accepting flexibility and difference with other people. And on that note, I am going to have a lie down.
We can have afternoon tea. Thank Alasdair.
Thank you.